Hogmanay is one of the most celebrated holidays in Scotland. It is celebrated each year on December 31st to see off the old year and welcome a new one. The Scots celebrate it with great pomp, partying all over the town. They have done it in such fashion for centuries now, as the holiday dates back to the age of Vikings. However, not every Hogmanay in the long history of the holiday was joyful. The Hogmanay on December 31st, 1929 was marked by one of the greatest tragedies in the history of the country. That day, 71 children were killed in the notorious Glen Cinema disaster. The tragedy that marked the years to follow in Scotland took place in the tiny town of Paisley in the west central lowlands of Scotland, right next to the city of Glasgow. The disastrous event happened during a matinee show in the only movie theater in town, the Glen Cinema. During the show, attended mostly by youngsters, a fire broke out. The cloud of smoke that filled the hall caused a panic among the public, which quickly turned into a stampede. 71 children were killed in the stampede, and another 40 were injured. Like many others, this tragedy, too, had a rather bizarre background. Here's what actually caused it. Welcome to Dark History, where we unravel the most disastrous events in history. If you want to support the channel, consider subscribing and liking this video. One of the customs associated with the Hogmanay holiday is the big cleaning. On this day, every housewife cleaned her house from the bottom to the top. Scots believe the house has to enter the new year all clean and shiny. Doing it with kids wandering around was undoubtedly a problem for mothers at the beginning of the 20th century, as it is today. That was the reason why on Hogmanay 1929, most moms from Paisley sent off their kids to the cinema. It was a gift to their beloved ones at the same time. That day, Glen Cinema showed a 1927 short western movie, The Dude Desperado, starring Fred Gilman and Dorothy Gulliver. Westerns were quite popular among kids at that time. The adventures of brave cowboys in the distant Wild West were everything boys dreamed of, so it was no wonder that the theater was crowded. There were a couple of adults, but most viewers were kids aged between 5 and 14. Later testimonies claim the number of kids in the theater was between 700 and 1,000. The beginning of the projection showed no signs the tragedy was about to happen. Everyone was in their seats, enjoying the movie as it went on. No one noticed a white smoke sneaking into the theater. Then, suddenly, an adult male voice yelled, "Fire!" And the crowd went wild. In a matter of seconds, chaos erupted, with people running all over the place. However, most of them ran downstairs toward the exit door that led to Dyer's Wynd, an alleyway at the back of the cinema. As much as it sounded like a sensible thing to do, those who ran toward the exit fell into a death trap. The exit door was not only locked, but designed to open inwards only. Thus, when the crowd of kids rushed to the door, it became impossible to open it. Still, the crowd kept pressing toward the exit. The theater was filled with screams of kids being trampled and crushed. The chaos that occurred was completed by the image of viewers jumping from the balcony in an attempt to escape the fire. The word of a fire in the cinema spread like a wind across the town, and in just a couple of minutes, the police and the entire fire brigade arrived at the scene. However, it took them some time to break the padlock on the exit door and open it by pushing the crowd behind. Once the door was opened, a torrent of kids and people rushed out, threading over the bodies of other kids, of whom many were already dead at the time. After the exit was cleared, policemen and firemen rushed inside the auditorium to rescue those still inside. They were horrified by the image of dead kids lying on the ground in front of the exit door. Many kids frightened by the fire remained in their seats, thus avoiding death by a stampede. Outside the cinema, citizens were helping those who managed to get out. Unfortunately, many of them were injured and needed immediate treatment. The number of those in need of help was huge, so trams and private cars were used to transport them to the hospital. Parents, too, gathered in front of the cinema looking for their youngsters. But, unfortunately, many of them never saw their beloved ones coming out of that cinema. The police counted 69 dead bodies and reported another 40 injured, of which 2 died later. The doctors stated that all children's deaths were the result of asphyxia caused by crushing. The firemen, however, established a more astonishing fact. The building was not on fire at all. Where there's smoke, there's fire, except in the case of the Glen Cinema disaster, The thing that caused the false alarm was the nitrocellulose film. The nitrocellulose film was introduced in the late 19th century and was used until the early 1950s in the movie industry. It was the best material for the purpose but had one crucial drawback that ultimately abandoned it. It was prone to ignite and explode at room temperature spontaneously. That day, the projectionist was changing the nitrocellulose film halfway through the projection, as he used to do every time he projected the movie. He put the film in its canister and gave it to his assistant. The assistant was supposed to rewind the film and prepare it for the next projection. After he rewound the film, the assistant placed it back in the canister on top of a battery, causing a short circuit. The film self-ignited and started to smoke. The poor assistant tried to take the can outside the building but found the door locked. Instead, he threw it in the hallway from where the smoke entered the auditorium. The manager of the cinema jumped to help and threw the smoking film outside the building. However, by that time, the auditorium was already filled with smoke, causing a full-scale panic among the visitors. However, it was not only the nitrocellulose film to be blamed for the disaster. Despite the panic that occurred, the tragedy would have been avoided if the exit door had not been padlocked. The blame for keeping the door locked was put on the cinema manager, who wanted to prevent the kids from sneaking into the cinema. He was put on trial but was ultimately relieved of all accusations. An inquiry clearly stated that the ignited nitrocellulose film was the cause for the tragedy, but that it was made worse by a padlocked door, the insufficient number of exits, and overcrowding. Yet, paradoxically, the morning the tragedy happened, Glen Cinema was inspected by the fire brigade and declared safe. The Glen Cinema tragedy struck the entire town of Paisley. Many families lost their kids in the stampede. Some of them 2 or even 3 children. The youngest victim was an 18-month-old baby. Most of the victims were buried on January 4th, 1930, with a huge procession held on the town's streets. It was of little comfort that the authorities ensured the cinema set capacity limits and introduced more exits with doors opening outwards. The Glen Cinema tragedy left a painful mark on the history of Paisley and the entirety of Scotland. I hope you found this video interesting. If you did, please like and subscribe. See you next time.